Well, Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa on Friday announced the name change of Grahamstown to Makhanda. The change has been published to the Government Gazette. Makhanda was a Xhosa warrior, philosopher, prophet and military man who fought against colonialism. Well, he led an attack against the British garrison at Grahamstown in 1819. The department says the name change is for symbolic reparation to address an unjust past. However, the battle for the city's name is far from over, with the main opposition group Keep Grahamstown saying that it has not excluded the possibility of resorting to courts to keep the city's original name.
The original, when this was first announced in 2007, that the name was to be changed, it was said that it was because the name is offensive and must change. We then tested that because in our experience as Grahamstonians, we didn't consider that that was a true statement. We tested it and we found that the views supported our viewpoint, and so therefore that is the basis on which we opposed the name change, and we've done that consistently through 3 full processes from 2007 up to 2013 until this most recent so-called process. It was not a process at all, which was conducted by the East Cape Names Committee and the South African Names Council.
People want money, people want to work, people want houses, people want to send their children to school education, people don't want better things to be done for them. You see? Yeah, not the way now things are being done now by all the Makhanas and all the municipalities in the country, stealing people's money. Yeah, they want a better living. Okay, for example, now I've said now they're going to use this 30 million rand. Why don't you use it building house for the people? Even the house that they have built just now, you can go to, I can take you out to Vukan location right now. They are falling down every day throughout the country. What is that?
Well, for more on the story, we now cross to Professor Jeff Peires, a historian and author of the Xhosa Lineage, the House of Phalo, from our Cape Town studios. Very good evening. We thank you very much for your time this evening, Professor. Well, Grahamstown has now officially been named Makhanda after a Xhosa warrior. Professor, who was Makhanda?
Makhanda was an ordinary person who was inspired. His other name was Mele, meaning a left-handed person. So the Dutch used to call him Lynx, but the name Makhanda was his throne name when he was elevated to the chieftainship.
Now, you know, he was also somewhat respected even by the British during his stay on Robben Island. Can you take us through some of the reasons why?
I think if I can just take you back a little bit, you see what happened was that Colonel Graham, after whom Grahamstown is named, had conducted a campaign of ethnic cleansing, what we call in history the Fourth Frontier War from 1811 to 1812. And the city of Grahamstown was built as a center for the conquered territory. Now, Makhanda, as we'll call him, rather than simply fighting, try to understand these new people and these new systems. And he used to sit in the Fort England in Grahamstown and discuss theology with the pastor van der Lingen of the Cape Corps Regiment. And through that discussion and through wandering around the garrison, he got a pretty good grasp of exactly what was going on, because everything else was very, very new. And he started to have visions. He referred to himself as the Unkulua, the younger brother of Christ. He said, who are these people? These people, the white people, have killed their God. And they have killed the Son of God. And God was so angry that he threw them into the sea, out of which they crawled to trouble the black people. But God is more powerful, therefore God will assist us to drive these people back into the sea where they belong. So that was his preaching, but he was a man of commanding presence. He failed only because of the superior armaments, and while the war was still on, when the battle was lost, he gave himself up so that the ordinary people should not be punished. When he was sent to Robben Island, he was not actually put in prison. They did respect him, as you've said, and they gave him a little house to stay in because he was a life prisoner. But when the other prisoners revolted and they overpowered the guards, they invited him to join them in escaping, and he climbed into the whaleboat, and unfortunately the whaleboat overturned and he was drowned.
Yeah. Now take us then through the significance of that. You now, describe the tie between Grahamstown, of it initially being named after a British colonizer, to that then of a warrior from the Xhosa land, and also describing the relationship that, the British did have with Makhanda. Why is this name change so important to be changed?
Well, I should just clarify, I'm not the person that took that particular decision. I think the thing is that the history tells us that Colonel Graham founded the town. It was named after him after he'd already left South Africa. And it was done specifically because he had chased out the indigenous inhabitants. It was for that achievement that the town was named after him. Now, you would not like really to have your town named after the very person who drove you out in the first place. So I think that is the rationale behind the name change, that Grahamstown was not a professor, he was not a philosopher. He was a soldier, and he did certain things which in today's democracy cannot be excused.
Yeah.
The decision to change the name to Makhanda has been controversial, partly because it's not an indigenous Xhosa name for that area. The Xhosa people call it Khini, which is a Xhosaized version of the name Graham or Graham. So whereas they changed the name of Queenstown to Komani, it was not controversial because everybody knows that the correct name of Queenstown is Komani. But in the situation of Grahamstown, a name had to be found, and I think that's why some people are not happy about it.
Yeah. Well, today is the 1st of July. It marks Mandela Month. It is the month in which Mandela would have turned 100 years had he lived. Just take us through Makhanda's role and recognition that he had by many democratic leaders, but more specific from that of Utata Madiba.
Well, it's a bit difficult to make a direct association because Utata Madiba was a prince of the Tembu royal house, which is quite a far way away. But I think that the Robben Island tradition, because not only was he a warrior, not only was he a philosopher, but Robben Island, in fact, was used as a political prisoner right from the 1650s until the 1990s. So the connection is that they were both warriors, they were both intellectuals, they were both nationalists, and everybody from that time to his time were kept prisoner on Robben Island, and I think that is the connection. And he was also, by the way, very tall, Makhanda. So I think that is the connection. It's a spiritual connection rather than a historical connection.
Definitely. We thank you very much for your time this evening, Professor Jeff Peires, a historian as well as author of the Xhosa Lineage, the House of Phalo, from our studios in Cape Town, just giving us a bit of history as to who exactly Makhanda was. Of course, Grahamstown has now been named officially from Friday from Grahamstown to Makhanda. We have been discussing that as well as the changes and the historic meaning behind it.